right, welcome everyone. I believe now we are all in from the waiting room. We'll continue to admit people as they sign up. I just want to make sure that you know that we are recording this session for the ARI YouTube channel. So that recording is on. You probably got a notification a moment ago. My name is Sam Winn. I'm here with my wonderful colleagues, Itza Carbajal and Maya Hirschman, and we're here for Let's Talk About Death. This is a session that has come about kind of organically through some macabre back channel conversations on Twitter. We came to realize that a lot of us engage with these concepts of death and mortality and decay in different ways in our collections, and thought that could make a really generative space for conversation because it's something that we don't often engage in the professional literature or in conference topics, even though it really permeates so much of what we do. So thank you for joining us for this session. Come and go, obviously it'll be recorded. If you have questions for us, you are welcome to submit them in the chat. You can submit them where everyone can see or just privately to one of the presenters. We'll be taking questions after all three of us have presented, and we're collecting them, compiling them in a shared document so that we have them ready to answer for you at the end of the session. And with that, I will hand the podium over to Itza.
That virtual podium, I like that. Hi, everyone. So it's been almost a year since I've last presented, so I'm a little rusty. Please be patient with me and us. So my name is Itza Carbajal. I'll talk a little bit about myself, but I'm going to get our conversation started because I'm going to talk a little bit on a broader level about death through the frame of controversial records, and really that relationship between why do we view records about death with this sort of default understanding that they are controversial by nature. And I'll be talking about a collection around September 11th or 9/11, not with a particular focus on that content, but just as an example of a collection that is very prevalent with themes of death, the dead, our ideas in relationship to death. So this is a little bit about me. I just finished my first year of my PhD at the University of Washington Information School. My advisor is Dr. Marika Safour, and I focus a little bit more on a particular type of population, specifically children or youth, with this idea that I want to study records about trauma that are either created by children or about children during particularly traumatic periods. I am also a settler in Seattle, the unceded ancestral lands of the Duwamish people, as well as the neighboring Suquamish, Stillaquamish, and Muckleshoot tribes. And you can contact me in a variety of ways, and I'm just happy to be here with everyone. And so I'm just going to talk I am either going to go very broadly and then kind of narrow in and then go back into broadly talking about my research study. So this was part of an independent research practicum with my advisor, really trying to think about what are controversial records? Why do we talk about these records? Why, as archivists, do we sometimes kind of hesitate and feel as though we're walking on eggshells when we're thinking about these records that people might consider sensitive or graphic or violent? There's just a lot of different words to talk about these difficult records. And so for my research practicum, I really wanted to just understand what kind of collections or what kind of records are being called controversial, and then also identify the records mainly through the collections that people keep on referring to and trying to understand what is the nature of that controversy, and then trying to pinpoint, what are some emerging themes that are coming out of these so-called controversial records. And so my big question was why and how should controversial records be digitally displayed? Why? It's because should we do this? Should we be focusing our attention on these records that are difficult in nature to either talk about, to display, to even preserve? And if we decide that, yes, that is something we want to do, how should we do that? And so that was my big question. I won't be talking too much about this, like my larger findings. I'll be presenting hopefully later this month on kind of those general findings. And so today I'm just going to talk about one theme, which is death. The other themes that emerged out of my initial literature review was like sexuality is one topic that seems to be very difficult to talk about when we're discussing records and people's access to them or people creating them, records about abuse. And so that can be physical abuse, sexual abuse, spiritual, financial, then also records of imprisonment. I'm, thinking about like records of detention as well as incarceration. And then specifically today's discussion was just records about death. And so the collection that emerged very early on in my analysis around controversial records was the September 11th digital archive. So this digital archive is created very shortly after the September 11th attacks in 2001 here in the United States. It is in a way a very participatory archival project in that people could contribute their records. And then it was also a very early example of a digital collection of born digital materials. And so not necessarily things that were digitized, but things that were already digital in nature, such as emails, cell phone photography. And so this collection, as many of you may know, is about a atrocious event in a country's history, very recent history, that has over the years, I believe it only was collecting for about 3 years. And so now it's just kind of stagnant, but it's collected a myriad of digital records, right? Everything from emails to like documents written on word processors to digital images, videos, sound, and it is still available online. It's just no longer accepting contributions. And I don't think it's in active development. It's just preserved by the Library of Congress now versus the original project coordinators. And so I want to give you just a couple of examples. I'm going to try not to show like the most graphic one, which is the reason death was mentioned as part of this collection. But I really want us to kind of think through these visual examples of like how death is prevalent in these collections in ways that aren't necessarily through, say, dead bodies. But death is just a theme that could either be very apparent in a digital collection or a digital object, or it can be something that can be gleaned out. So say in this first example, there's a memorial that's specifically talking about how this community during 9/11 was mourning the death of their community members. I want y'all to kind of notice the metadata or lack thereof. That's also important. That comes out later, and just my own conversations with myself around like, should I be only looking at the digital object or should I be looking at the metadata record as an object itself? So example 2 here, it's the wall of missing people, just because so many people were just people couldn't contact them and trying to find them. And so this idea of like there might be a presumed death because you just don't know. This topic around death of like when you don't know if someone is dead, what sort of impact does that have on somebody is actually very relevant in a lot of other collections I've worked with, in particular like forced disappearances. And so I thought that was an interesting kind of look at how death is talked about or not talked about. This one, I study children and I want to think about how children relate to records as well and how children are creating records. And I thought this one, thinking about how children are processing these difficult emotions and like, how do we even talk about these difficult topics with younger audiences? It would make the most sense to show them things that they're able to relate to, such as these drawings that these children were asked to make during this sort of like period after 9/11. Another one is a photography, specifically like, well, what is the text saying in this photograph, as well as like how does it have a relationship with this death that this person is trying to process? And in this case, like it is a relationship between a child and their parent that is no longer there. The other ones, thinking about like the difference between a photograph of like a card versus a photograph of something that is much more graphic in nature. So here, these are seconds, I believe, after the first airplane crashed into one of the towers. And so like this conversation around death is looming in this case, and that we know that something atrocious is happening, or now in the future, we know what exactly happened after this period. The next one here, the September 11th digital archive is really interesting in that people could contribute anything that they saw as relevant to the September 11th attack. And so these are ruins, I believe. I don't think it's Afghanistan, but I think it's somewhere in the Middle East. And so like also this relationship between like what are the deaths that are related to these historic periods, right? And like how do we talk about the aftermath of this atrocity, and how death just continues to be prevalent, and not just in that moment of the attacks in Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C., as well as New York. And I'm so sorry. I wanted to give y'all a warning that the next image is the one that really was discussed as a controversial record that then kind of placed this blanket over the September 11th digital archival collections as being controversial, is because there are these images of a lot of the people that decided to take their own life during the September 11th attack. And so like these smaller images, right, have really kind of cast a shadow over all these other collections while still talking about death, but talking about death in a very kind of in your face way, which is very different than, say, like if we were to talk about death through the posters that we saw in that first image, or the drawings that the children's made. And so I think I'm just going to show it very briefly. You'll get the gist of what's happening there. But so this is a very different image of death than all the other ones I've previously showed, and very much different than all the other ones that I've studied throughout my other collections. But they all talk about death, right? They all talk about our relationship to the dead, to this concept of passing. And I'm just going to skip over very quickly. But I want to start wrapping up because, as I said, like I just wanted to talk very broadly about this research study and my own kind of formulation of ideas on like what is happening when we're talking about controversial records, and like what are some expectations that we're placing on ourselves, on our users, what are our users placing on us, as well as like what are the responsibilities that we have to the past, the present, as well as the future. And here I really lean a lot on Dr. Tanya Sutherland's conversations around like death and records of death, in particular with a focus on like, well, how is archival work a sort of ritual, or at least us providing capacity for other people to continue their rituals around death, or around just like afterlives and these ideas of what happens after we pass this particular world, as well as public mourning. And public mourning for digital collections is especially important to consider because like the virtual world is this new public, right? That we're engaging with almost simultaneously sometimes with other people, as well as attempting to ensure that other people in the future can engage with this. Oftentimes people that will have never had any sort of connection with the things that they're engaging with virtually versus having like a physical connection to it. So say September 11th, we have many generations now that were not here, but they're only learning about it through these photographs, perhaps through these emails and other sort of digital as well as physical records. So I think I think I'm okay, right, Sam?
Yes, you're doing great.
Awesome. I'm not even timing myself. But so a little bit about what I am proposing to do, like in the wider research focus, is to really break apart this idea of controversial records and kind of clarify exactly what is making these records so controversial, or why they're viewed as controversial in nature. And so my proposed typology right now is thinking that there is a distinction between records that have some controversial context, because a lot of the records and collections that I would read about, that there would be like some sort of uproar, was really more about what was happening behind the scenes. So like, was this collection being purchased at a high price, or why was this collection being purchased at all, versus the content of the collection was not necessarily the controversial aspect to it, but it was more about the context of the collection either coming into an archival repository or even being considered to be preserved for the future. And then we have collections that are sensitive in nature, and so this can be anything from like being culturally sensitive or requiring some sort of awareness from people in order to engage with it respectfully or in a more authentic way, as well as like how to be sensitive to like people's personal information. Also having this kind of awareness of like, well, what do you do when this information is being put out into the world, and how is that impacting either the creator or the subject? And then we have the sensational, which is, I think, what a lot of archival discussions are more about when we're thinking about what do we need to do in order to not have controversial records gather that controversy, is because I think we're afraid of the people or of the uses that would sensationalize these records, right? And really take them out of context, as well as like not provide adequate description around the content either, where it's more of like those images of the people from the tower. It's like, how would that image be used in ways that weren't to like, talk about, say, mental health or something around suicide prevention, versus like just using it like on a t-shirt or something, like, and just in a very insensitive and just perhaps I don't know, commodifying this pain around death in order to make like some sort of profit. And then you have graphic, right? So like, how do you thread that line between something that is graphic just by nature? Because a lot of records about death are very violent. As we know, a lot of records about slavery and enslaved bodies, like those are very violent by nature, purposely violent by nature. And so how do we talk about the graphic nature of that versus like, say, records about sexuality? Some discussions would say that those are also graphic, but it's just a different sort of graphical nature. And so I'm still working that out, trying to come up with sort of like an idea of like, well, how do those relate to my next slide, which is what are some archival considerations that we need to think about when either dealing with controversial records, acquiring controversial records, teaching with these records, as well as promoting their use. Because I think, as my other colleagues will say on this panel, records about death are very useful for understanding a variety of things. And so it's our panel today, I think, is trying to talk about how can we not shy away from this topic that people might see as something that is just like a little too touchy, and just really think of approaches that would allow us to do it in a authentic, respectful, ethical way. And 4 areas that I'm really interested in kind of expanding on are description. As we know, a lot of digital collections lack description in general, but controversial records, I think, require much more robust description in order to kind of prevent a couple of the concerns that we're talking about, either of like taking things out of context, or people sensationalizing the content itself. Then there's also consent, and just really thinking about the relationship between how this record came into a collection and who is impacted by what happens when that record goes online. Also developing policies and kind of encouraging practices that highlight principles. So it's like, yeah, are we prioritizing the consent of subjects just because we want their safety or we want their well-being, or are we prioritizing this sort of expansion of use of records that might traditionally not be seen as being very useful because they're just a little more difficult to talk about. And then also use or reuse, and having to understand that there is an increased interest and an increased capacity to use these digital records. And so we're not going to be able to prevent these things from going outside of our control or outside of an archivist's control. But so how can we either encourage good use and reuse practices, or how can we support other people who might be able to promote these principles that our collections would want to uphold? And so with that, I'll wrap up, and I want to hand it off to Maya. If you have any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat. This is my email as well, and I'm also super happy to keep talking about this. This topic is of immense interest to me. So thank you all so much for attending, and we'll chat soon.
Itza, that was great. My name is Maya, and I'm just going to share my screen with you. I'm taking a very different look at death in the archives, and mainly because I think it's safe to say that this is me kicking around an idea can that probably won't make it into my dissertation. My name is Maya Hirschman, and I've worked in museums and galleries for about 25 years, and I've been a curator since 2006. I'm currently a PhD candidate at the University of Toronto, Faculty of Information, where I'm researching community-derived museums and the relationships between memory and identity, history and secrecy. Specifically, I'm examining how a community of Second World War radar veterans, whose wartime work was for 50 years, hidden by the Official Secrets Act, tracked each other down, reunited, and engaged each other in memory work to collectively compile their undocumented stories and eventually open a small museum dedicated to their unknown history. My supervisor is Dr. Kara Kompotich. The museum, which is located in London, Ontario, is called the Secrets of Radar Museum, and in this short presentation, I'll discuss how mortality and existential awareness makes itself felt in the archival collection held by the museum. Before I go any further, in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, I want to pause in order to acknowledge the land I reside on. I live in London, Ontario, on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, Lenapehoik, and Attawandaron peoples, on lands connected with the London Township and Sombra Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. I respect the long-standing relationships that Indigenous nations have had to this land and continue to have, as they are its original caretakers. And I further acknowledge the historical and ongoing injustices that First Nations, Métis, and Inuit endure in Canada. I accept responsibility as a representative of a public institution to contribute toward revealing and correcting miseducation, as well as renewing respectful relationships with Indigenous communities through teaching, research, and community service. Community museums frequently preserve the minutiae of everyday people's lives, sometimes in great detail, reflecting professional or hobby communities, such as service organizations, military regiments, quilting societies, or model steam engine builders, as much as communities related to geographic locations, such as villages, mining towns, or a local school. These museums, often small and overlooked, are helping to write the histories of their communities, of our communities. Many hold not just artifacts, but archives as well. These archives may be idiosyncratic, reflecting the understaffed nature of little museums, but they're often incredibly rich. There's a small, very small niche history museum located in London, Ontario, called the Secrets of Radar Museum, which I'll probably refer to as SORM. that was created to assemble the collective history of the Second World War Royal Canadian Air Force radar program and the veterans who served in it. The museum originates in a history of silence, and very much a silenced history, from which echoes nevertheless continue to reverberate and affect both its community and the stories it tells. And I'm just going to stop for a second and warn you that there is an arborist cutting apart my neighbor's tree, and I hope it won't get too noisy. I'm really sorry. I've called this presentation Echoes and Silence, a community records its end of life, because as a museum, SORM represents a community of veterans who worked with radar technology. Radar relies on transmitted radio signals that echo back to the receiver. When no echo is returned, the target, whatever it was, has been lost. Echoes, like memories, fade, and the museum was created by veterans as a way to make permanent their collective and individual memories in the writing and displaying of a history that had been completely overlooked. It's a distinct museum in the Canadian landscape, the only one solely devoted to radar, and the only radar-related museum founded without Department of Defense funding. Its founders conceived their museum as a place to tell their story and educate the public, but in so doing, they created a space where they built important relationships, reinforced personal and community identity, did memory work, and regained and extended their independence and quality of life. SORM opened its doors to the public in 2003, the final output of this dedicated group of veterans determined to have their voices heard. The vets and the wartime program in which they served were subject to the Official Secrets Act from 1941 until 1991. When the Official Secrets Act covering the radar program was finally lifted, the community of veterans, which was spread out across Canada and internationally, began to locate one another. Some of these thousands of men and women had, over the course of their 50 years of silence, already begun compiling and organizing their memoir, biographies, and historical sketches, preparing them for the day they could finally talk. And when that day came, they did talk. Boy, did they talk. To anyone who would listen, but most importantly, to each other. I want to mention here that the permanent archival and artifact collections held by SORM, along with the wartime radar program itself, are dominated by men. It's dominated by a masculine presence and a masculine voice. While in Britain, women made up perhaps over half of the operational radar forces, their role in Canada was far more limited, and in both Canada and Britain, the technical or mechanical roles were filled entirely by men. The archives reflect this gender imbalance, from equipment to uniforms to photographs. With the exception of a handful of small collections donated by radar women, the majority, even of women's uniforms and materials that represented their participation, were usually collected and donated by men. For the most part, the collection held by the museum represents the objects the veterans felt represented them and their work in the radar program. It houses an eccentric array of electronic devices, including wartime radar equipment, that they scavenged and salvaged from who knows where. Many vets were licensed amateur radio operators, so these pieces of equipment could be stored in their radio shacks, where they could tinker with them or just hang on to them as mementos of their past. There are uniforms and medals, of course, and numerous collections of photographs, as well as military documents, original and photocopied and scanned, and a surprising number of souvenirs from the radar reunions they organized and attended through the 1990s. Most of the documents, photographs, and other ephemera are housed in archival boxes and have been culled, sequenced, and organized. These are represented in the museum's catalog database. Not always very well, but most of them are there. I can't say what archival technique, if any, was used to organize them, however. Death is present in these collections. There are obituaries, and memorials clipped from newspapers and other publications. These are recollections of fallen comrades. But the subject of death or mortality usually appears in offhand or matter-of-fact statements or anecdotes about fellow radar or Air Force personnel who died in action or on active service. While notable, they're rarely accompanied by a demonstration of emotion or lingering concern. With only a few exceptions, typically within the recorded oral histories, these deaths are recounted as historical facts and rarely more. Although most of the archives are organized and findable, SORM also holds archival collections that haven't been rehoused or organized. Death is in these as well, but it must be sought out. These collections were donated, typically, by overwhelmed family members who, for many reasons, would or could not go through them, and which have arrived in whatever order they were dumped in their boxes, and it's impossible to know how complete they are. As a little museum, SORM often lacks the resources to go through them, and they remained boxed, waiting for the day they will be processed. This past winter, while closed due to the pandemic, one substantial donation of this type made its way to the museum. The donation arrived in 5 large cardboard boxes and was accompanied by an array of artifacts that may or may not be relevant to SORM. The collection belonged to a veteran that I'll call Robbie, that was in fact his wartime nickname, who passed away in 2010 and had no children of his own. Presumably held by his widow for 10 years until her own downsizing, his records came to SORM when his niece, with the promise or threat that if the museum didn't take the stuff, it was all going to the dump. So on the right of the screen there, I just want to point out the 5 boxes on the floor are that collection. And the materials on the table past the archival box are just a handful of the possibly unrelated artifacts that were donated as well. It includes a saber and a bayonet. You know, as you do. Robbie retired in 1985 from a career in science and devoted the next period of his life to radar research, carrying out a substantial literature review and locating many gaps and inaccuracies in the record of radar research and development. When the Official Secrets Act lifted in 1991, Robbie began in earnest to track down members of his former radar group and related squadrons. He was responsible for researching and compiling the names of every Second World War radar officer working with the Royal Air Force, and he became a rigorous historian of the radar program, its people and technology. His collection is mainly comprised of labeled and organized folders, usually tied with string, and holds hundreds of pieces of meticulously organized correspondence between him and many other veterans in chronological order, spanning the period of about 1988 to about 2005. While it's possible they were reorganized by a family member after his death, due to the way he labeled and tied up his folders and the scraps that are still included, it appears Robbie's archival collection remains in nearly original order and has retained its provenance. None of the radar historians that I know, or any of the veterans or their families that I know of, knew that this collection still existed until it arrived at the museum. And it has revealed layers to the radar story I frankly never expected to find. So bearing in mind that Robbie's fonds are brimming with personal correspondence between him and other radar veterans, it's from his collection I'm deriving my examples that follow. By the time the Official Secrets Act expired in '91, the youngest radar veterans were just entering their 70s. Many were already in their 80s. Reunions were front of mind, and as they reconnected, they encouraged each other to share their stories. Some had been preparing their memoirs for years, others had to be coaxed, but the push was on to compile the collective history of their program, and time was not on their side. Many veterans had not lived long enough to speak freely, and their names were added to the roster posthumously, but their stories generally speaking, were gone. If you spend some time with the memoirs held at SORM, you find different sorts of autobiographical narratives. Some are firmly in the past, fact-driven and emotionally distant. Others are lyrical, captivating, and beautifully written. Death is occasionally touched upon, usually recounting in passing something awful that happened long ago. Some vets offer an introduction that explains why it's important to record their memoirs. A few write with their end of life firmly in mind, and with a desire to leave a historical legacy before they're gone. And in these, they talk freely of their increasing frailty, changing circumstances, illness, and death. Often, when their life writing touches on illness or mortality, it depicts a level of robustness and even denial, where illness happens to others within the community, perhaps close by, but discussed at an arm's length. Robbie's substantial collection of research notes and correspondence spanning almost 2 decades holds correspondences between veterans that carried on over the course of many, many years. In his letters, it's possible to witness that denial, where death happens to other people or long ago in the past, but isn't something to be thought about or worried about now. But it also demonstrates a gradual transformation into an existential self-awareness. At times, the veterans' correspondence becomes poignant when a mutual friend from their radar days has passed. But the greatest depth of feeling emerges as their loved ones, often their spouses, become ill and die. The death of close friends, and especially of spouses, usually representing marriages many decades in length, reveal unrealistic expectations of who will die first, challenging ideas of responsibility, and creating in them a sense of vulnerability. Loss, of course, shakes confidence. It upends our worlds and can put things into new focus. Our priorities change. Letters demonstrate that, at times, when faced with loss, veterans lose their verve for intellectual pursuits. But loss also catalyzes the veterans to action, reminding them that they have much to do before they go. Relationships carried out through Robbie's correspondence weather the ravages of time and show marked changes in narrative style and tone. As the veterans first reached out to each other, and after years of estrangement, they exchanged their roles and experiences, confirming and correcting shared events and filling the blanks for those whose deployments and postings abruptly changed. They collected each other's contacts, tracked each other down, extending their network of veterans, and compared notes, repeating this process through the 1990s in long, sometimes very long letters. The photograph at the top of the screen shows one box of Robbie's correspondence, and they're all listed with names of fellow radar personnel, and each one of these contains an almost complete record of their correspondence in chronological order, and they are incredibly easy to cross-reference with each other. It's incredible. God bless Robbie. In these letters, they make plans, both formal, as in reunions, and informal personal visits to meet each other, sometimes for the first time. They grew to know each other decades after they lost contact, carrying with them the stories of their friends who could not make those trips and visits, and they worked to collect each other's stories for publication. Within Robbie's archive, relational experiences and identity-confirming narratives are juxtaposed with highly intellectual pursuits of technical facts and the chronicling of history, often within the same letter. The 1990s is a decade marked by this fervor, where veterans reached out and reignited their community's passion, and where death is lamented but largely glossed over. The early 2000s mark a dramatic change. Loss is more openly discussed. Statements such as, "I hope to have one more visit with," or, "Unfortunately, health issues being what they are prevent me," become more frequent. In 2000, the majority of veterans were now entering their 80s. In that year, a large volume called Canadians on Radar, 1940 to 45, was finally published, containing many of the collected anecdotes and memoirs that they brought together through reunions and these broad correspondences, fleshing out a carefully researched history of the RCAF radar program. And the push was on to open a permanent museum to illuminate their history. Although the museum opened in 2003, it was initially staffed by veterans who led the tours and gave talks. By 2006, the vets recognized that they needed outside help to keep the site running. The first curator was hired in 2008, and in 2013, the last veteran to volunteer on a weekly basis at the museum retired. He was 94. During the same time, a change occurs in Robbie's correspondence. Not only does this period mark a time when many of the vets were downsizing, moving into condos, retirement communities, and care homes, but it also marks a technological shift in their communications. Where in 1991, vets were mailing long type and handwritten letters, by 2000, many were shifting to email. Radar veterans, having backgrounds in electronics and communications, were never afraid to adopt new technology. But with the adoption of email, the previously long-form letters were now becoming abbreviated. Well, I think that's partially a symptom of the immediacy of email, one which I recall as I too made the shift in the late 90s to electronic communication. In at least a handful of cases, I think it may represent the time and effort needed to correspond from people whose vigor was fading. There are many apologies for not answering sooner and promises to do things that don't appear ever to get done. And often the communications abruptly stop, and I'm left wondering what happened. I am perhaps 1/6 of the way through Robbie's archival collection, barely scratching the surface. I have encountered stories of loss set in the past, for instance, the shelling of a station, and short reflections about veterans that had recently passed. One sequence of letters is particularly moving and shifted the back and forth conversation between two mutual friends from their shared radar history to the decline of the friend's previously lively wife due to a stroke, then her placement in a care home, and then the deeply sad letter of condolence from Robbie and his wife, and a long melancholy response from his bereaved friend. About a year later, the friend, still clearly aching with the loss of his wife, had resolved, with his daughter's help, to write his wife's family history based on the notes and diaries she left behind. He'd moved on from his own radar history to his new project, but in doing so, regained a sense of purpose. It also marks an end to the letters that deal with the shared radar past, transforming to discussions of the present and aspirations for the immediate future. I wonder whether this will become a repeated pattern where a veteran catalyzed by a death will alter his priorities and recenter himself in the present. What else will I find in Robbie's collection I can't hazard to guess? Will abruptly ended correspondences be picked up in other folders? Will gaps left by illness or death be filled in by other veterans who pick up the narrative? I don't know. The archive at SORM is distressingly full of gaps and silences. This is as much due to the high level of secrecy that surrounded the radar program and the temporal distance between when the war ended and when the Official Secrets Act was lifted, as it is the uneven patchwork of materials collected and stories recounted by the veterans who rarely had backgrounds in historical research. While death is not a primary or even secondary focus of my research, the silences created by secrecy are. And when death occurred before the veil of secrecy was lifted, a silence is left behind. Death is a subject that's always interested me. I don't want to say I'm morbid, but I probably am. It's possible I'll develop a future paper on death in the veterans' records and collections, but for now, one of my key focuses is how the veterans engaged in social work within their community and the museum. The language the aging veterans use to discuss death is interesting. The shifts between pushing death away, denying it, and the transitions that cause them to engage with it. But more importantly to my research, I'm interested in how the veterans did or did not engage in empathetic and sympathetic end-of-life care among their fellow community members. There's a growing body of research within social work practices that examines how community members support each other in times of loss, which I may be able to translate into the experience of the radar veterans in SORM. Similarly, there are explorations of the so-called quality of death and dying that consider the social and emotional aspects of end-of-life care as equal to health and comfort, which have parallels to my own research into social work in museums. While it may not find a direct route into my dissertation, I believe this tangent is important, relevant to both community museums and community archives. I want to thank you for listening to my talk, and I welcome any questions sent through the chat or to my contact information, which will come at the end of our presentations. Thanks very much. I'll hand it over to Sam.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm going to get my screen share now set up and turn on my video maybe. All right, so thank you again to Itza and Maya. I'm always so encouraged and inspired by the work that you're doing, and it's amazing to actually hear everything we've been talking about all these months coming to light. So I'm excited to revisit this in the future. So my presentation, if you know me, is going to go a bit into left field, and we're going to have fun there, and we're going to grow, and we're going to have existential crises together. So a bit about this paper. It came out of a fantastic class at the University of Arizona called Monstrous Ecologies. So I'm indebted to and really grateful to the mentorship and the guidance of my fellow students in that course, and to professors Chris Kokinos and Yoella Jacobs, who I'll talk more about in just a moment. Presentation generally is called Our Monstrous Archives. Here is a little bit about me. My name is Sam Winn. I use she and they pronouns. He is also okay, she and they preferably. I am at Sam Winn on Twitter and also on Mastodon's glamour.us, which is a shared instance for library, gallery, archives, and museum folks. And you can email me here, samwin@email.arizona.edu. Galaxy brain, if you've never heard this term, this is the direction many of my presentations tend to go, and it comes from a meme that was originally posted to Reddit in 2017. So this is a template. You may have also seen the Vince McMahon variation. We're going to get excited. I'm going to get emotive. Feelings are happening. I use this phrase a lot to explain the kind of affective and metaphysical process that I go through when I'm working through a lot of these issues. It drives a lot of my writing. And if you've ever talked to me at a conference, you know that I tend to go 0 to 11 really quick. So special thanks, first of all, to our Canadian colleague and freelancer, Alana Mayer, whose public domain store on Society6 artworks has been a constant inspiration to me. All of the proceeds, all of the profits from this store go to benefit the Society of American Archivists Mosaic Scholarship Fund, and they come from public domain artwork. So you can see this is my fantastic mug. The first thing I ever bought from Alana years ago. This is Remains of Prehistoric Man, and it's my constant and ever-present death memento. I've also included here a link to Professor Chris Kokinos' book. He wrote a memoir about vanishing birds, about bird extinction, and the literary plants project that Professor Yoella Jacobs and colleagues run at arizona.edu, which helps to generate a lot of the really interesting work I'll reference in my presentation here in just a moment, relating to the archives and the material decay. So the Journal of Critical Library and Information Studies published a special issue on libraries and archives in the Anthropocene in May of 2020, and drawing upon multiple disciplines and temporal perspectives, the authors explored these cycles of entropy and decay the interventions and legacies of non-human agents in material memory, the archives as a living system, and possible futures or non-futures of the archival profession. Together, they sought to trouble, disassemble, and reconstitute the modern archival field in anticipation of accelerated climate change. And if you haven't yet explored that issue, I deeply encourage you to. The whole issue is just incredibly rich and provocative. In my piece, Dying Well in the Anthropocene on the End of Archives, I argued that the management and the materiality of archives will be transformed beyond recognition by advancements in information and communications technology, the rise and decline of neoliberalism, and the acceleration of climate change. I wrote about how the affective labor of anticipatory grief drives us, and proposed that the profession take what I called a palliative approach to planning its own transubstantiation. This juxtaposition of dread and acceptance struck a chord among many of my colleagues. Project ARC, the Archivist Responding to Climate Change group, featured the article in a series of teach-ins held in 2019 during the global climate strike, arranged by our colleagues Itza Carbajal and Ted Lee. And it also inspired a plenary session at the 2020 annual meeting of the Association for Canadian Archivists, inviting the profession to plumb the effective depths of climate dread and articulate what we had feared to admit about the future of our work. So you'll see on the screen a few tweets that I captured from the ACA plenary. Our informal hashtag was ACA climate dread. And as you can see, we really got into some deep and weighty topics. And we had a good scream, which I highly recommend for every conference panel ever. So anytime we grapple with symbolic death, acolytes of Freud and Becker argue that we're confronting our very own literal, inevitable death. Solomon et al. Call this awareness of death the worm at the core of our existence, arguing that humans, reminded of their own mortality, are predisposed to defend both their self-esteem and the integrity of any group to which they belong. This integrity is the pursuit of symbolic immortality through material memorials that testify to and about our lives. In revisiting the J-CLIS special issue, I began to contemplate how archival practice reflects the dynamics of attraction and aversion that scholars theorize at work in our individual psyches. So in many ways, archives embody both death and its denial. Danny Stuckel argues that the Anthropocene is, for the archives, a symptom, a pathologization of materiality, a diagnosis. Although we rarely integrate this reality into our practice, the fundamental chemical and logistical processes of archival management concede that entropy has the advantage of time. Preservation work that is described as prolonging the life expectancy of collections is a tacit admission that the materials would decay beyond recognition without careful chemical and environmental interventions. Technological optimism has lured archivists into an uneasy complacency. Afraid that we might unknowingly destroy something precious to the future, we're tempted to hold on to everything in a kind of purgatory state just in case. We call this ocean of informational and material detritus the backlog, and we're all drowning in it. We only have so much time and space to carry out our missive, and every decision we postpone in this working life is inherited by future generations of archivists. The Anthropocene forces us to confront the irrationalities of neoliberalism with its candy-coated assurances of limitless growth and infinite resources. Even the Society of American Archivists core values statement and code of ethics admits in its most recent iteration that, quote, the costs of long-term preservation and ongoing challenges of accessibility prevent most of the documents and records created in modern society from being kept in perpetuity. And yet, very little has been written or said in our field about how to carry out this work of letting things go. We treat death and dying as the end, as a moment of transition before and after a life concludes. It's this trace moment inscribed just as it ends, evidence of its existence captured in a single disembodied instant. And we call this frozen moment the record, and we expect it to testify with unwavering authority and authenticity. We are tempted to believe that the record can speak for itself. We presume that life can exist in the archives without the maintaining work of death. Imagine archives as a mausoleum of memory, a physical monument to the liminal barrier between past and present. Each sepulcher is given a name, a date, and a location against which various assumptions can be tested. We trust these markers to describe something that's real and true. The container, we hope, testifies that a body is there or was once there. Archivists painstakingly maintain these tombs in anticipation of future visitors, keeping them tidy and safe from the weather, ensuring in as much as possible that these markers are neither moved nor removed from their proper context. So long as they remain legible, the border holds fast between living and dead. Records are to cultural memory as plastination is to burial. That is to say, one representative moment held in abeyance, whose immortality is subject only to the whims and weather and the limitations of modern chemistry. Certainly, a record might satisfy some scientific curiosity. A record testifies that a moment once existed in the present tense. It provides evidence of an instant observed without requiring the messy presence of an observer. It can substantiate or undermine a diagnosis or a legal claim. And in contemporary practice, archivists embalm and maintain these material tracings just in case a future Dr. Frankenstein wants to sit them and stitch them together and set them on parade. This artificiality, this death prolonged and denied, constitutes what I call the monstrosity of the archives. Conflating the record of a moment with its reality is this grotesque distortion of the human experience. The archives become a battlefield of ideologies where the victor prevails by sheer attrition. Who lasts the longest? Archives are a critical technology of empire, legitimating and cementing campaigns of domination. Exclusion from the archives is an act of symbolic annihilation, as Michelle Caswell tells us. The records of domination serve as a kind of memento quod vixit, an assurance that the ideals of the empire can never truly die so long as a record of their existence remains. And of course, who do we assume has the resources to keep their records in stasis? By intent and effect, archives are static representations of dynamic events. When materiality is upheld as the highest form of evidence, any loss of embodiment is akin to death. I'd be remiss at this point if I didn't acknowledge that I've been haunted for my entire career, over 10 years now, by Percy Bysshe Shelley's Ozymandias. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." Like Shelley's colossal wreck, our skin and bones and papers and plastics have a finite lifetime. One day, despite our best efforts, they will be worn away by wind and water, gnawed on and scattered beyond our recognition. The death of an archives, even the archives, is inevitable in the long span of history. And yet the living world reminds us that death is not the end. Decay, when carried out intentionally and in community, harnesses death in the production of new life. I'm recording these sentiments amid global pandemic that has worn through our steadfast American optimism to exhume these banal cruelties of capitalism, expansionism, extractionist industry. We've seen so much death in the past year and a half, 2 years, in excess of 13 million deaths beyond the normal, what we would expect, according to one recent Johns Hopkins study cited in The Economist. These events have cast doubt on every institution, on deeply held assumptions of fairness and belonging. They've drawn into sharp relief as well my own personal frailties, my own resilient places, and the breadth and depth of my adaptive possibilities. I don't think these struggles can be separated. So following Eva Hayward's practice of critical enmeshment, I wrap up this disquisition by acknowledging my body minds, queer, gender nonconforming, disabled, mad, in enduring confrontation with a society that aims to kill off all these parts of me. It's bound up in and transformed by these contemplations. Personally, I've begun to embrace death as both a necessary presence and a healing practice in the archives. It provides a foundation for radical acceptance, and it reminds us that palliative care, like the construction and care of memory, is the work of community, period. A story can always be retold so long as it has a teller. Although material objects may accompany the act of telling, they can never, never, never replace it. The story is sustained through relationships among the storytellers, the audience, and the places of sharing. Each offers what is needed and none pretend to be true. That's it. Right, with that, I will hand this over to Itza, who I think is managing our questions.
Yes. So I do see two questions, one from Sydney and then one from Sonia. I'm going to give just a couple of seconds if y'all want to write it down. You can also raise your hand, and I'm going to keep just a stack of who's raising their hands if you want to say it verbally, but also feel free to write it in the chat and then I can read it out loud. Maya, Sam, y'all are ready for the first question? Okay. Thank y'all so much. This is amazing. I think I'm like slightly sobbing. So Sydney, talks about the potential for psychological burden, right? And I'm surprised we didn't bring this up already. But so this burden of engaging in grief and loss work, when discussing and witnessing materials of death, what do the panelists believe is the role of collaborating with psychological specialists when engaging in either, I think Sydney's mentioning research in particularly, but maybe we can broaden it out to just general work with these types of records. Maya, Sam, y'all want to take the first look at that?
Okay, I guess I'll go first. So a lot of the research I have been working with is interdisciplinary. It sort of started, it started with Lois Silverman's book about social work in museums. And it's sort of exploded from there. So Lois Silverman herself is a social worker and a museum professional. So she, in this book that was written in 2010, I think, she brings them together and basically says that museums are already sites of social work. They just didn't know it. And social workers and the profession of social work didn't know this. There is a tradition, especially in art museums, of bringing psychology and the art museum together to look at social work, especially around Alzheimer's and dementia. I have not seen much that really explores museums and death, with the exception of course, the big exception of trauma, traumatic death, Holocaust, genocide, etc. That is very well explored. But death as sort of an everyday, as an everyday part of our lives, and as it sort of turns up in museums and museum archives, that doesn't get a lot of examination, at least not in the contemporary period. There is some exploration of Victorian like diary keeping and what have you in early 20th century, but it's not big. So on my committee, I have Lynn Howarth, who is just retired from the I school at U of T. She's now emerita. And she brought sort of material culture. She's not a museum person per se, but she's interested in life writing and life narratives and senior citizens. And she brought material culture and life writing together in her recent research. And so she's sort of pushed me in this direction to sort of look from two different fields. And I would love professionally to engage with people working in the field of death and psychology and social work to in the future. I don't know, there's no time for my dissertation, but that should be hopefully wrapped up in a year. So yeah. Those are my thoughts on sort of an interdisciplinary relationship between other professional areas. Sam?
Yeah, so my experience with this question, I was a practitioner for several years, most recently at Virginia Tech, and I worked with the International Archives of Women in Architecture, predominantly with people who were either recently retired, were planning, making end of life provisions, or with their family members after the person had died. And it can be a really emotional experience. I'm looking forward to hearing from our other panelists, because I think this is something we don't get training on. And I'm always cautious of two things. One, assuming that archival expertise gives us the capacity to be experts at everything. I don't think it does. I am all about working with qualified professionals in those fields to do this kind of planning, to have counseling materials on hand. I tend to meet each donor where they are. And, often it's a good idea just to frankly acknowledge it. And, if you are in practice, I found often that the donor was much more comfortable than I was acknowledging their own death and even joking about it. So just to be prepared for that and not to try to diminish it or push it away as we often do with death talk. I think it's something that can be really powerful for any archival practitioner to basically come to terms with their own feelings towards mortality, so that when other people are grappling with them, we're there and we're present and we're creating a safe and a welcoming and inviting generative space for them to work through this. And just if you're doing home visits in particular, like be ready to spend all day. Maybe you're going to put your hands on a lot of stuff and like maybe people are going to cry, and that's okay. And it's a really solemn and profound honor that we have to be with people in this decision process in their lives. Great question.
Yeah, and I want to go to Sonia's because I think it's a good follow-up, but I want to kind of expand on Sydney's question around like not just us working with these materials, but us working in tangent with someone else. And so like I want to work with children, right? And I want to work with children as users. And so like I know absolutely that I need the support of like early childhood educators in thinking about how do I talk to these particular users that are in a particular stage in their life around developing ideas and feelings towards these concepts, and how can I talk to them in a way that I'm also not projecting my own expectations around death that are both cultural as well as personal, and like how can I encourage them to have like a positive relationship with death when that may not also be cultural to them, or it may already be cultural in a way that is like way more advanced or just different than the way I approach death. So absolutely to collaborations. I am an archivist and I am not trained in many other things, so I need someone else to help me in the trainings that they are proficient in. Should I move on to Sonia's question, or
Can I just add to that? So working as a mainly history curator for most of my curatorial career, I'd say 50% of the donations that I've worked with, especially, so I guess I probably should have said this before, I was the curator of the Secrets of Radar Museum for 7.5 years. So working with people who are aging, who are downsizing, who are dying, or who have died, death came up quite a bit, and there's absolutely no training that I received at the museum in museum studies, museum management, etc., to help you navigate this. It was something learned on the job. And over time, I came to realize that for the most part, it was important to be direct, to be sensitive, but direct, because there can be pussyfooting around the donation of stuff at the end of life, and humming and hawing, and sometimes you need to have very direct conversations. And I wish there was an aid to helping people have these conversations. And I, one day, maybe I'll develop one. Yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, Sam, maybe you already started talking about Sonia's question, but Sonia was asking, what sort of resources should archivists have on hand when communicating with donors in particular, who are already donating as part of their end of life process? And there is a really great session coming, well, there are many, but there are two today that are pretty relevant to what we've been discussing, and I think what our audience is interested in. But I don't know if you want to add something. I have thoughts, but I would like to give the floor to you first.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all about this. This is a huge part of my personal journey, and a big reason I went back to university to study, basically to have a space where I can just grapple with these questions and have people take me seriously instead of being the weird colleague who talks about death all the time. There's space for that too. Bless all of my colleagues at Virginia Tech that walked through that with me for the 6 years that I was there. All I can say is I think it's important for each of us to do the work, and that it's important for the field to do the work. There is such a gap in our professional training generally as it relates to cultural humility and empathy and affect. I think that ARI and its scholars are a really good source for a lot of important work that's being done there, and anything we can do moving from the academic galaxy brain sphere into the really practical, we're grappling with this together, we're reading some of the literature from evidence-based practices tangential to ours, we're ceding expertise to the people that actually have it. I'm really hopeful that the next 10, 20 years in archives will be a collective effort towards that, because I think it has to happen.
Yeah, I would add that I think some of the resources are oftentimes really focused on the like, how can I get your stuff? And not necessarily on how can I help you grieve through your stuff. And so that's oftentimes like what I like to focus a little bit more on, is I want to really think about the people behind the records, right? The people in the records, and the people that are impacted by the records. And so when we think about resources, like, yes, I totally agree about that there are ways to train archivists to be like, yeah, how do you talk about death? But then it's like, when should you talk about death? How much should you talk about death? And just really understanding that the end goal isn't the records. Like, the records are important and they are very much that embodiment, right, of what the person or the people are feeling. But it's like, I am, in my professional opinion, it should be the people that matter a little bit more. Let's see, I don't see questions. I see really great conversations, good reading recommendations. Thank you, Ruth. Also, Manisha recommended a reading. I think it's a reading. No, it's just a comment, but important comment to acknowledge. Does anyone else have any questions? We're a little over time, but we're happy to take one more question from folks if y'all just want to say it in the mic or put it in the chat. You can unmute yourself as well. I don't think you're restricted. Manisha, I'm sorry if I said your name wrong, by the way.
No worries. But you said my name right. Thank you. This is an excellent topic. I have no training in this, but for the past 10 years, I work with the First Nations. And I'm from India. So to be working with First Nations, death is a ceremony. And as somebody posted a link about oral history, that's really good. I do not see much written information on this topic, so I find that I have to educate myself or learn from the community. This is not taught in library, in our academic education, at least. It was not taught to me in my academic education. I really think a lot of sensitivity is involved. And in Canada, we have seen many RCMP reports because, they do an investigation when death is going on and they're not supposed to be, when a death ceremony is going on, but I have not seen much literature in archives or in library or GLAM sector. Thank you. So it's a really valuable session, and I think more people need to hear about it because this is a gap in our academic education. Exit. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think not everyone's video is on, but we were nodding in agreement that we didn't learn any of this really. And I think you'll find throughout this week at ARI, these conversations have been existing for a while within these smaller circles, but they're expanding. And Stephanie mentioned, how do we make this mainstream? And it's really just, we got to keep talking about it. We got to talk to each other. We got to really challenge kind of our own notions. I feel like I'm responding to the non-question, but I also would love to hear from y'all, what can we do to talk about these things? One step was to have this panel, but how does this continue? Maya, Sam, do y'all have any ideas on how we can keep this going?
Well, we have some really great comments coming up in the chat that I think are getting to the root of these questions. Alan, what a fantastic resource. Itza, Alan says that your work in particular reminded them of the book, The Private Worlds of Dying Children. There's just tremendous resources in the chat. The main thing that I recommend is, keep talking about this. This presentation in particular will be posted on the ARI YouTube. Share it with your friends, make a response panel telling us everything we got wrong, just keep it in the conversation. And to be able to talk about it with other people, again, I believe it's important to be able to talk about it with ourselves. And Alana mentioned Death Cafe. So Death Cafe is a really fantastic kind of informal program where people, plan coffee, tea, nosh dates to just talk about death in a way that's, semi-structured. I am so into these, and I love having opportunities to talk about them. So the rambling answer is, I think a lot of it's about having conversations with ourselves, holding space to invite other people into those conversations, and then using that, as someone said in the comments, to start poking holes in our maybe in our professional training and showing where those deficits are. All right, Itza, Maya.
I'm going to send some links to upcoming sessions so that y'all know which ones. But Maya, feel free to, kind of end us on a good note. And if anyone wants to send anything in the chat, please feel free.
End us on a good note.
End us on, or whatever note, some note.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a good note to end on this. This is, like I said, this is not my main area of research, although it's a fascination. And I have a history of doing exhibitions that relate to the impermanence of human existence and our frailty. However, I am encouraged by, especially within the last couple of years, the fact that there are people who are thinking about this, at least in a way, related to what we've been talking about, and publishing this material. So I think there may be where the trend is on the rise. And I think that you're going to see a lot more about this, and the admission that, you know, it's not covered in our programs. I come from a museum background, you guys are archival, but it's just, you know, loss and death and grief is integral to the story of life. So, you know, how we talk about it, how we show empathy, how we maintain a continual practice of care with our donors and their families is vital to, I think, moving our sectors into a more open, to greater openness. Yeah, I don't know. I have no further deep thoughts.
Anything you want to add, Sam, or should we wrap up?
Yeah, thank you all for being here, and hope to see you at some future sessions. Stay tuned for the YouTube recording, and let's keep talking about death.
Everyone, it's been a delight.